Empress's baby dragons scared alien babysitter until a human baby girl maid. Them Chuckle kanked Part2 the morning alarm that shattered. Rose's peaceful sleep wasn't the gentle chime she'd programmed into her quarters. It was the emergency klaxon that meant only one thing. The dragon twins were having another growth episode. 3 years had transformed the royal nursery from a place of chaos into a sanctuary of laughter and learning. But as Rose sprinted down the crystalline corridors of the draconian palace, she couldn't help but miss the simpler days when Smoke and Ember's biggest mischief involved teleporting shoes and creating pretty smoke rings. Now, at the draconian equivalent of 5 years old, their magical surges could accidentally reshape reality itself. She burst through the reinforced doors to find a scene that would have sent any other caregiver fleeing in terror. The nursery's enchanted walls, designed to contain dragonfire hot enough to melt starship hulls, were buckling under waves of uncontrolled magical energy. Smoke, his once tiny form now the size of a large dog with wings that shimmered like captured starlight, was floating 3 feet off the ground, his eyes glowing with power he couldn't control. Every few seconds, objects around him would simply vanish, teleported to random locations throughout the palace. Ember, his sister twin, had it worse. Her growth spurt had triggered an emotional firestorm, and everything within a 10-foot radius was either melting or spontaneously combusting. Tears of molten gold streaked down her scaled cheeks as she tried desperately to contain flames that erupted from her with each sob. At the center of the magical maelstrom sat 3-year-old Lily, completely unperturbed, building a tower of blocks that kept disappearing and reappearing thanks to Smoke's uncontrolled teleportation. Her curly blonde hair was singed at the edges, and her pajamas bore scorch marks. But she looked up at Rose with the fearless grin that had first charmed 2 baby dragons years ago. "Rosie," Lily called out cheerfully, as if sitting in a supernatural storm was perfectly normal. "Smokey made my blocks play hide-and-seek, and Emmy's being a really hot nightlight." Rose's heart clenched with familiar affection and terror. 3 years of raising interspecies children had taught her that love and practical problem-solving could overcome almost anything, but these growth spurts were testing even her considerable experience. "Good morning, my brave little ones," Rose said calmly, pulling on the specialized gloves that could withstand dragon fire. "I see we're having a big feelings morning." The sound of her voice seemed to anchor the twins slightly. Smoke's floating dropped to only a foot off the ground, and Ember's flames dimmed from white-hot to a more manageable orange. But Rose could see the fear in their large, intelligent eyes. The same fear she'd seen in countless human children who were growing too fast and couldn't understand the changes happening to their bodies. "I can't make it stop," Smoke whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air shimmer. As if to prove his point, Rose's favorite coffee mug vanished from a nearby table and reappeared embedded in the ceiling. "I keep sending things away and I don't know where they go." Ember sniffled, sending up a small puff of steam. "Everything I touch gets hurt. Even my favorite blanket turned to ash." Her voice broke on the last word, triggering another wave of heat that wilted the genetically modified fire-resistant plants in their pots. Rose's mind raced through everything she'd learned about draconian physiology during her 3 years as Royal Companion Coordinator. Growth spurts in dragons weren't just physical, they were magical, emotional, and psychological all at once. Traditional draconian society handled this by isolating young dragons until they gained control, but Rose had long ago rejected the idea that isolation was ever the answer for children. "Lily, sweetheart, can you come to me, please?" Rose asked gently. The little girl skipped over, stepping casually through Ember's residual flames as if they were nothing more than warm sunlight. In truth, Lily had developed a strange immunity to dragon fire, something that still baffled the palace's physicians, but which Rose had learned to simply accept as another wonder in their unconventional family. "Remember our breathing game?" Rose asked, positioning herself so that all 3 children could see her. "The one that helps when feelings get too big for our bodies?" Lily nodded enthusiastically and immediately began the exaggerated breathing pattern Rose had taught them. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 8. It was a technique she'd learned during her pediatric training, adapted for children whose emotions could literally reshape their environment. "Smoke, Ember, can you breathe with us? Remember, magic follows feelings and feelings follow breath." Slowly, gradually, the twins began to mirror the breathing pattern. Rose had learned that dragon magic was intrinsically tied to emotional state. When they were calm, their abilities flowed smoothly. When they were upset or frightened, the magic became wild and dangerous. As their breathing synchronized, the magical chaos began to settle. Smoke's teleportation became more controlled. Objects stopped vanishing and instead began gently floating in place. Ember's flames dimmed to the soft, warm glow that had always been her signature, like a living fireplace that radiated comfort rather than destruction. "There we go," Rose murmured, settling cross-legged on the floor so she was at their eye level. "Magic is like water. It flows best when it's not fighting against rocks." "But what if I can't control it forever?" Smoke asked, his young voice heavy with worry that no 5-year-old should have to carry. "What if I accidentally send Lily somewhere far away? What if I burn down the whole palace?" Ember added, unconsciously curling her tail around Lily protectively. Rose felt a familiar ache in her chest. These children carried the weight of incredible power, but at their core they were still just kids who wanted to play and be loved without hurting anyone. The challenge of raising them was helping them grow into their abilities without losing their essential childlike wonder. "Do you know what I think?" Rose said, pulling all 3 children into a careful hug. "I think you're both growing into something amazing, and growing is always a little scary, even for humans. But we're going to figure this out together just like we always do." From the doorway came a gentle cough. Empress Vala stood watching them, her expression mixing maternal pride with deep concern. Rose could see the question in the Empress's eyes, the same question that had been hanging unspoken in the air for weeks. Were they reaching the limits of what even the most dedicated human caregiver could handle? "Your Majesty," Rose said, helping the children to their feet. "I think it's time we discuss some new arrangements." The Empress nodded gravely. The easy days were over. Now came the real test of whether love, patience, and human ingenuity could guide 2 young dragons through the most dangerous period of their development, or whether some challenges were simply too great for any family to face alone. The grand diplomatic hall of the Draconian Palace had hosted peace treaties between warring star systems, trade agreements that shaped galactic economics, and ceremonial events that defined interstellar relations for centuries, but it had never hosted a playdate. Rose stood at the viewing balcony, watching 3 of the most important children in the galaxy meet for the first time, and tried to ignore the fact that 12 armed guards, 4 diplomats, 2 child psychologists, and 1 very nervous empress were holding their collective breath. Below, in the center of the hall's gleaming floor, young Prince Prism of the Crystalline Empire stood like a living rainbow. The child heir appeared to be made of living gemstone, their body constantly shifting through spectrums of color as they communicated through complex light patterns. Each thought, emotion, and word manifested as beautiful cascades of luminescence that danced across their crystalline features. "Remember," Rose murmured into her communication device. "Prism speaks with light, not sound. Bright flashes mean excitement, soft glows mean happiness, and—" She was interrupted by a sonic boom that rattled the reinforced windows. Smoke and Ember had just arrived via teleportation, a dramatic entrance that sent several diplomats diving for cover and caused Prism to flare brilliant white in what Rose desperately hoped was surprise rather than fear. 3-year-old. Lily skipped in through the conventional entrance, completely unbothered by the tension, carrying her favorite stuffed dragon and wearing her best dress, the one with scorch-resistant fabric that the palace tailors had specially designed for her. "Hi there," Lily called out cheerfully to Prism, waving with the fearless enthusiasm that had always been her superpower. "I'm Lily. Are you the crystal kid? You're really pretty." Prism's light patterns shifted to soft pinks and golds, clearly pleased by the compliment, but the dragon twins were another matter entirely. Smoke and Ember had grown significantly in the weeks since their first major growth spurt, and they now moved with a predatory grace that spoke to their heritage as future war dragons. More concerning, they were displaying what Rose had learned to recognize as territorial behavior. Their scales had darkened to deep emerald and crimson respectively. Their eyes were glowing with inner fire, and low, harmonious growls were building in their throats, the kind that, in adult dragons, preceded devastating attacks. "Oh, this is not good," Rose muttered, already moving toward the stairs. She could see the crystalline delegation exchanging worried light signals, while the draconian guards were subtly shifting into defensive positions. Prism, apparently oblivious to the growing tension, took a step toward Lily and began generating a complex light display, probably introducing themselves in the formal crystalline manner. The patterns were beautiful, cycling through deep blues and purples that painted the hall in otherworldly colors. That's when everything went wrong. The light display triggered something primal in the dragon twins. Rose had read about it in the ancient texts but had never seen it happen. Light speech, particularly the formal pulsing patterns used in crystalline diplomacy, resembled the threat displays used by dragons' natural enemies in their evolutionary past. Smoke and Ember reacted as if they were being challenged to combat. Their coordinated roar shook the entire palace. Windows cracked, crystal ornaments shattered, and 3 of the crystalline delegates, being made of living crystal themselves, actually fractured under the sonic assault. Prism flared brilliant red and orange patterns that Rose's quick training recognized as distress signals. "Stop!" Rose shouted, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Smoke teleported directly between Prism and Lily. Wings spread wide in a protective stance while Ember began building up for a fire attack that could melt solid stone. The diplomatic guards were reaching for weapons. The crystalline delegation was retreating in full panic mode, and Empress Vala was rising from her throne with an expression that promised swift and terrible consequences. That's when Lily did something that would later be recorded in diplomatic history books across the galaxy. She walked calmly between 2 furious dragon children and 1 terrified crystal prince, plopped down cross-legged on the floor and began to sing. It wasn't a particularly sophisticated song, just a simple human nursery rhyme about friendship that Rose had taught her. But there was something about Lily's clear, fearless voice cutting through the supernatural chaos that stopped everyone cold. "Make new friends but keep the old," she sang, looking directly at Smoke and Ember. "One is silver and the other gold." The twins' aggressive posturing faltered. They'd been raised on human songs and stories, and Lily's voice was as familiar to them as their own heartbeats. More importantly, it reminded them of something Rose had spent 3 years teaching them. Friends were precious, and protecting friends didn't mean hurting everyone else. Prism's light patterns shifted to curious greens and blues as they cautiously approached. Up close, Rose could see that the young crystal being was actually quite small, probably equivalent to a human 4-year-old. Despite their advanced diplomatic training. "A circle round has no end," Lily continued, holding out her hands to both sides. "That's how long I want to be your friend." Smoke was the first to move. With the careful grace he'd learned during 3 years of playing with a fragile human child, he gently nudged Lily's outstretched hand with his snout. Ember followed suit from the other side, and together they created a protective circle around both Lily and the nervous crystal prince. Prism's lights shifted to wonderstruck silver as they realized they were being included rather than threatened. Tentatively, they reached out with 1 crystal in hand and touched Smoke's scaled nose. The reaction was immediate and magical, literally. Where crystal met dragon scale, soft sparkles of light began to dance, creating patterns that were neither draconian fire nor crystalline luminescence, but something entirely new. "Well, I'll be damned," breathed one of the human diplomats. "They're creating hybrid light magic." Rose felt tears of relief prick her eyes. Crisis averted, interstellar incident prevented, and 3 powerful children making their first tentative steps toward friendship. But as she looked around at the shattered crystal ornaments and the still nervous faces of the diplomatic delegation, she realized this was just the beginning. The twins' growth spurts were making them more powerful and more reactive. Prism's presence proved that they would need to interact with other alien children, some of whom might trigger unexpected responses. And somewhere in the background, Rose could feel the weight of watching eyes, evaluating every moment, every decision, every success and failure. Empress Vala approached the children slowly, her expression mixing pride with deep concern. "Well handled," she murmured to Rose. "But this incident will not go unnoticed by the Galactic Council." Rose nodded grimly. She'd prevented a diplomatic crisis today, but in doing so, she'd also demonstrated just how dangerous the dragon twins could be when startled. The question now was whether the galaxy would see this as proof that her methods worked, or evidence that some children were simply too powerful to be raised in peaceful integration. As she watched Lily teaching Prism a clapping game, while the dragon twins provided gentle light and warmth, Rose made a silent promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Whatever evaluations or judgments the galaxy wanted to impose, she would find a way to protect this fragile, precious bond between children who represented the future of interstellar cooperation, even if it meant fighting the entire galactic establishment to do it. The imposing figures standing in Empress Vala's private study looked like they had stepped from the pages of galactic military history. Commander Thrix, a veteran draconian general whose scales bore the scars of a dozen wars, stood beside Dr. Kalin, a renowned child psychologist whose 4 arms gestured with mechanical precision as she spoke. Between them, Master Yorthak of the Imperial Academy for Gifted Younglings maintained the kind of perfect posture that spoke of decades spent molding young minds into weapons of state. Rose felt distinctly underdressed, in her practical childcare clothes, but she kept her chin high as she faced what amounted to a tribunal. Through the study's windows she could see Smoke, Ember, and Lily playing in the secured garden, their laughter carrying faintly through the reinforced glass. The children had no idea their entire future was being decided in this room. "Miss Collins," Commander Thrix began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, "the incident with the crystalline delegation has brought certain concerns to the attention of the Galactic Council of Royal Education." Dr. Kalin's cybernetic eyes whirred as they focused on Rose. "While we acknowledge your success in managing the initial behavioral issues, the twins' reaction to Prince Prism demonstrates a fundamental lack of proper control training. In any other circumstances, their response could have triggered an interstellar war." "But it didn't," Rose said calmly, though her heart was racing. The children worked through their initial fear response and formed a friendship bond that's stronger than any political alliance. Master Yorthak stepped forward, his presence radiating the kind of cold authority that had shaped generations of galactic leaders. "Miss Collins, with respect to your unconventional methods, the Imperial Academy has successfully trained young beings of immense power for over 3 millennia. Our graduates include the current rulers of 17 star systems and the commanders of the galaxy's most elite military units." "Your graduates," Rose replied carefully, "include beings who were separated from their families as children, trained to suppress their emotions, and taught that power is more important than connection. Is that really what you want for Smoke and Ember?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Thrix's scales darkened with barely controlled anger. "What we want, Miss Collins, is for the future rulers of the Draconian Empire to be prepared for the realities of galactic leadership. The Academy provides structure, discipline, and proper training in power management that, frankly—" He was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze, the distinctive harmonic roar that meant the twins were in distress. Through the windows they could see Smoke teleporting frantically around the garden, while Ember's scales glowed with heat distress. At the center of their agitation, Lily was trying unsuccessfully to calm them down. "They know," Rose said quietly. "Dragons are empathic. They can sense emotional tension from great distances, especially when it involves people they love." Dr. Kalin's mechanical eyepieces clicked as they adjusted focus. "Fascinating. This confirms our psychological profiles indicating unhealthy emotional dependency between the subjects." "Subjects?" Rose's voice sharpened dangerously. "They're children, not experimental specimens." Master Yorthak moved to the window, studying the scene below with calculating eyes. "This is precisely the problem, Miss Collins. Observe their behavior. Completely uncontrolled, guided by emotion rather than logic, unable to function independently of their human attachment figure. At the Academy, they would learn to channel these responses into useful skills." Rose joined him at the window, watching as Smoke accidentally teleported a section of garden fountain into a tree, while Ember's distress heated the air around her until flowers began wilting. "What you call uncontrolled, I call caring. What you call dependency, I call love. And what you call useful skills," she turned to face the 3 evaluators, "I call the death of everything that makes them who they are." "Miss Collins," Empress Vala spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice heavy with the weight of impossible choices. "Perhaps you should demonstrate your methods. Show them what you would do in this situation." Rose nodded and activated her communication device. "Lily, sweetheart, can you hear me?" The little girl looked up at the study windows and waved. "Hi, Rosie. Emmy and Smokey are having big feelings because the scary people are here." "I know, baby. Can you tell them that Rosie is okay? and that I need them to show the visitors how brave and gentle they can be? Within moments, the chaos in the garden began to settle. Smoke's teleportation became more controlled as he helped repair the damage he'd caused, while Ember used her fire ability to carefully reheat the soil around the wilted flowers, encouraging them to bloom again. Lily supervised with the natural authority of someone who'd been mediating between powerful beings since she could walk. Emotional manipulation, Dr. Kalin observed clinically. While effective in the short term, this approach creates dependency and prevents the development of internal regulation mechanisms. Does it? Rose asked. Or does it teach them that they're loved unconditionally, that mistakes can be fixed, and that their power can be used to heal rather than destroy? Master Yorthak turned from the window, his expression unchanged. Miss Collins, your methods may work in a controlled environment with unlimited resources and no external pressures. But what happens when these children face real challenges? What happens when they encounter enemies who cannot be charmed or situations where emotional intelligence is insufficient? Before Rose could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the study in red as automated voices announced, "Solar storm detected. All non-essential personnel to protective shelters immediately. Estimated time to full impact, 47 minutes. Commander Thrix's military training kicked in immediately. The palace's energy shields won't hold against a storm of this magnitude. We need to evacuate the children to the deep shelters." The crystalline delegation, Dr. Kalin added, her cybernetic eyes processing data streams. Their environmental suits won't function in the lower levels. They'll need climate-controlled transport pods. Master Yorthak was already moving toward the door. This is exactly the kind of crisis situation that demonstrates why proper academy training is essential. In emergencies, there's no time for emotional consideration, only efficient, trained responses. Rose looked out at the garden where 3 children were staring up at the darkening sky, confusion and fear clear in their young faces. Around the palace, she could see staff members running in organized panic, crystal delegates being hurried toward protective vehicles, and the first flickers of energy discharge beginning to dance across the atmosphere. "You're right," she said quietly. "This is exactly the kind of situation that will show what really matters." But as she headed toward the garden to collect the children, Rose wasn't thinking about academy training or proper protocols. She was thinking about 3 little ones who trusted her completely, and whether the love and emotional intelligence she'd spent 3 years nurturing in them would be enough to face their first real test. In 47 minutes, they would all find out if tradition was right, or if love could truly conquer anything, even the raw fury of a star in chaos. 23 minutes until full solar storm impact, and the draconian palace had become a maze of emergency protocols and barely controlled chaos. Rose sprinted through corridors filled with evacuation teams, her heart pounding not from exertion but from the weight of impossible responsibility. Behind her, 3 children who had never faced real danger were about to discover what their powers truly meant. "The main evacuation lifts are failing," Commander Thrix's voice crackled through her communicator. "Energy fluctuations from the storm are interfering with all electronic systems. We have 17 crystalline delegates trapped in the upper towers. Their environmental suits can't handle the temperature changes, and we can't get transport pods to them." "What about the human embassy staff?" Rose asked, helping Lily keep pace while Smoke and Ember flanked them with growing worry evident in their glowing eyes. "Stranded in the East Wing. 3 of them are elderly, can't make the climb down without assistance. And Empress Vala," a pause that lasted too long. The Empress was inspecting the diplomatic quarters when the storm hit early. "She's trapped in the crystal tower with the delegates. The structure is collapsing faster than our engineers predicted." Rose stopped running. Around her, palace staff continued their urgent evacuation procedures, but everything had suddenly become crystal clear. The Academy evaluators wanted to see what happened when emotional bonds faced real crisis. The universe was about to provide the ultimate test. "Lily," Rose said, kneeling to the little girl's eye level, "remember when we talked about being brave helpers?" Lily nodded solemnly, her small face serious in a way that broke Rose's heart. At 3 years old, she was already learning that sometimes being loved by powerful beings meant sharing their responsibilities. "Emmy, Smokey," Rose continued, turning to the dragon twins, "your mama is in danger. A lot of people are in danger. The grown-ups are trying to help, but their machines don't work in the storm." Smoke's scales shimmered with anxiety. "We're supposed to go to the safe place underground." The safe place is for people who can't help, Rose said gently. But you two aren't ordinary people, are you? You're dragons, and dragons protect the things they love. Ember's inner fire flared brighter. But what if we mess up? What if we make it worse? Then we'll fix it together, Lily said with the absolute confidence of someone who had never seen her family fail at anything important. That's what families do. Rose felt a moment of vertigo as she realized what she was about to do. Every academy protocol would say this was insane, sending untrained children into a crisis situation. Every instinct she had as a caregiver screamed that she should protect them from this burden. But looking into their young faces, she saw something the evaluators had missed. These weren't just powerful children. They were dragons who had learned to love, and love was the strongest force in the universe. Okay, she said, standing up. Here's what we're going to do. The plan Rose outlined in the next 5 minutes would have horrified child safety experts across the galaxy, but it was brilliant in its simplicity. Smoke's teleportation abilities could reach anywhere in the palace, but he'd never tried to teleport other people. It was too dangerous without precise control. Ember's fire could melt through the collapsed debris, but she'd never used her abilities for anything more challenging than lighting candles. Lily's role was the most crucial of all. She would be their anchor, the calm voice that kept them focused when everything around them was chaos. But I've never teleported anyone before, Smoke said, his young voice trembling. What if I send them somewhere wrong? What if they get hurt? Then we'll bring them back and try again, Rose said firmly. Smokey, do you remember the breathing exercises? Remember how magic follows feelings and feelings follow breath? Smoke nodded, already beginning the deep, controlled breathing that Rose had taught him for managing his abilities. Emmy, remember when you helped the garden flowers grow back? Remember how you made the fire gentle and warm instead of burning? Ember's flame shifted from anxious orange to steady gold, like a hug made of light. Exactly like that. The first test came faster than expected. They'd barely reached the central hub when they encountered a group of palace guards trying unsuccessfully to break through debris that blocked the path to the human embassy staff. The fallen stones were too heavy for conventional methods, and explosives would risk bringing down more of the structure. I can do this, Ember said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. She approached the debris pile with careful steps, her flames building gradually from gentle warmth to focused heat. But instead of the wild, destructive fire of her early childhood, this was precise, controlled, surgical. She melted through stone and metal with the delicate touch of a master craftsman, creating a passage exactly wide enough for rescue teams to reach the stranded staff. Incredible, whispered Dr. Kalin, who had insisted on following them despite Rose's protests. The precision, the control, she's instinctively understanding molecular heating points. But there was no time to celebrate. Reports were flooding in from across the palace. More people trapped, more systems failing, more situations that required exactly the kind of help that 2 young dragons and a fearless human child could provide. Smoke's first attempt at teleporting rescue workers nearly sent them into a wall, but Lily's calm coaching helped him adjust. Remember peekaboo, Smokey. You always knew where I was even when I was hiding. People are just bigger peekaboo. By the time they reached the crystal tower where Empress Vala was trapped, the twins had rescued 12 people, cleared 4 blocked passages, and discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. More importantly, they discovered something academy training never could have taught them: the absolute certainty that they could trust each other completely. The crystal tower was the ultimate test. The structure was collapsing from the top down, and the crystalline delegates' environmental suits were failing in the fluctuating temperatures. Worse, Empress Vala was unconscious, trapped under debris that was too delicate to melt and too heavy to move conventionally. This is it, Rose said, looking up at the impossible rescue. Everything we've learned, everything we are, this is what it was all for. Lily took Smoke's hand in her left and Ember's claw in her right. We're family, she said simply. Families don't leave each other behind. What happened next would be talked about in dragon lore for generations. 2 children who had been taught that love was stronger than fear, working in perfect harmony to save everyone they cared about. Smoke teleported with precision that defied his age, moving people to safety in carefully calculated jumps. Ember used her fire not to destroy but to heal, warming failing environmental suits and melting away debris with impossible delicacy. And Lily, small and human and powerless in any conventional sense, stood at the center of it all and did what she had always done. She loved them enough to help them believe they could do anything. When the last delegate was safely evacuated, and Empress Vala opened her eyes in the medical bay, the solar storm was already beginning to pass. Rose found herself facing the Academy evaluators once again, but this time their expressions were very different. "Well," Master Yorthak said finally, "I believe we have our answer about Miss Collins' methods." But Rose was no longer thinking about evaluations or Academy protocols. She was watching 3 children who had faced the impossible and discovered that they were stronger together than any of them could ever be alone. The real test hadn't been whether they could handle a crisis. It had been whether love could create miracles. And miracles, Rose reflected as she hugged her extraordinary family, were exactly what the galaxy needed more of. The Galactic Council chamber had hosted many historic moments, but never quite like this. Representatives from 47 star systems watched in fascination as 3 children sat at the center of the vast circular hall, completely unbothered by the attention of some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, Smoke and Ember, now recognized as heroes following their performance during the solar storm crisis, sat with the natural dignity that came from discovering their own strength. Lily, wearing her best dress and her proudest smile, swung her legs from the specially designed chair and waved cheerfully at the various alien delegates who were still processing what they'd witnessed. Rose stood behind them, trying to project calm confidence while internally marveling at how dramatically their lives had changed in just 3 weeks. The same children who had once been considered too dangerous for conventional caregiving were now being hailed as a model for the future of interspecies cooperation. "The evidence is irrefutable," Master Yorthak was saying, his voice carrying none of its former skepticism. "Miss Collins's approach has produced results that exceed our most optimistic projections. The subjects, the children, demonstrated not only exceptional power control but also unprecedented teamwork, empathy, and problem-solving abilities under extreme stress. Council Leader Thane, a being whose species had transcended physical form, millennia ago and now existed as pure energy, pulsed with colors that Rose had learned indicated deep consideration. The implications extend far beyond individual success. If these methods can be replicated across species, we may be looking at a fundamental shift in how we prepare young beings for leadership." Commander Thrix, who had once viewed Rose's methods with suspicion, stepped forward. "The Draconian Military Command formally requests permission to implement similar bonding protocols in our youth training programs. The tactical advantages of emotional synchronization between team members are significant." Rose felt a warm glow of vindication, but it was tempered by growing concern. Success was wonderful, but it was also bringing pressures she hadn't anticipated. In the weeks since the solar storm, their family had been visited by child development experts, military strategists, diplomatic corps representatives, and even entertainment industry executives who wanted to create holographic documentaries about their story. However, Dr. Kalin interjected, her cybernetic voice cutting through the chamber's buzz of excitement. "We must address the sustainability concerns. Miss Collins cannot possibly train caregivers for every powerful child in the galaxy. The demand is already overwhelming our preliminary estimates." That was the problem Rose had been losing sleep over. In the 3 weeks since their heroic rescue, requests had poured in from across the galaxy. Royal families with children who were struggling with power control, military families whose young ones showed dangerous abilities, even civilian families who had children born with unexpected capabilities. Everyone wanted the dragon method, as the media had started calling it. The royal family of Androxa has specifically requested assistance with their shapeshifter twins, Council Leader Thane continued. The telepathic consortium has 3 children who cannot control their mind-linking abilities. The Time Walker Collective has a young one who keeps phase-shifting between dimensions accidentally. Lily tugged on Rose's hand. "Rosie," she whispered loudly enough for half the chamber to hear, "are we going to get more friends?" The innocent question cut to the heart of the issue that was keeping Rose awake at night. How could she help other families without abandoning the children who had become her whole world? "The solution," came a familiar voice from the chamber entrance, "is not to spread Miss Collins thin. but to spread her knowledge wisely. Empress Vala entered with the graceful authority that had made her one of the galaxy's most respected leaders. Behind her walked a figure that made Rose's heart skip. Dr. Maria Santos, the human xenopsychologist who had first recommended Rose for the dragon babysitting position 3 years ago. "Your Majesty," Rose said, surprised. "Dr. Santos, I didn't know you were coming." Dr. Santos smiled. "When the Galactic Council starts requesting formal advisory opinions on human childcare methodologies, they call in the experts. Rose, what you've accomplished here isn't just individual success. It's proof of concept for an entirely new approach to interspecies development." Empress Vala moved to stand beside the children, her massive form somehow managing to be both protective and proud. "The Draconian Empire proposes the establishment of the Interspecies Childhood Development Institute, with Miss Collins as its founding director. Rather than asking her to personally care for every challenging child in the galaxy, we provide resources for her to train others in her methods." "But who would we train?" Rose asked, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. "Most species have completely different approaches to child rearing." "Other humans to start," Dr. Santos said. "Your success has prompted Earth's educational authorities to fast-track the Xenopediatric Specialist program. We have 17 graduates ready for field placement with more in training." Smoke looked up at Rose with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. "Would that mean you'd have to go away?" "Never," Rose said firmly, kneeling to hug all 3 children. "This is our home, our family. But maybe we can help other families be as happy as we are. I think," Lily said with the matter-of-fact tone she used for important announcements, "that would be very nice. Everyone should have dragon friends." Council Leader Thane pulsed with approval colors. "The Galactic Council unanimously supports this proposal. The Institute will be granted full diplomatic status, unlimited research resources, and protection under interstellar law." Over the following hours, Rose found herself overwhelmed by the scope of what was being offered. A state-of-the-art facility that would serve as both training center and research institute, teams of experts from across the galaxy who would help adapt her methods for different species. Most incredibly, a guarantee that Smoke, Ember, and Lily would always remain her priority, even as she helped train others. But it was the afternoon's final surprise that truly took her breath away. As the formal sessions ended and the delegates began filing out, Master Yorthak approached with an expression Rose had never seen on his face. "Humility." "Miss Collins," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. The Academy has spent 3 millennia teaching young beings to suppress their emotions in favor of control. What you've shown us is that emotions, properly channeled, can create control that surpasses anything we've achieved." He paused, looking at Smoke and Ember, who were showing Lily how to create tiny light displays with safely controlled fire. "Would you consider accepting Academy graduates as students? Not to replace your methods, but to learn from them?" Rose felt a moment of dizzying perspective. 3 years ago, she'd been a recent graduate desperate for any job that would let her work with children. Now the galaxy's most prestigious educational institution was asking to learn from her. "On one condition," she said finally, "any Academy graduates who come to study with us have to understand that children come first. Always. Not future leaders, not potential weapons, not diplomatic assets. Children." Master Yorthak nodded solemnly. "I believe that's a lesson the Academy has needed to learn for a very long time." As Rose watched the 3 children who had changed her life playing together in the vast chamber, she felt a familiar mix of pride and protective worry. Success was wonderful, but it was also bringing them into a larger, more complex world. The challenge now would be growing their mission without losing the simple, powerful truth that had made everything possible. Love was still the strongest force in the universe. Everything else was just figuring out how to share it. 1 year later, the Interspecies Childhood Development Institute buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that Rose had learned to associate with successful learning. The facility, built into a floating orbital station that could accommodate beings from any environment, housed the galaxy's most ambitious educational experiment. Rose stood in the observation deck of the main playroom, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine just 4 years ago. Smoke and Ember, now the size of small horses but still unmistakably her babies, were patiently teaching a young shapeshifter named Flux how to maintain a stable form during emotional stress. Their student kept involuntarily shifting between a crystalline structure, a cloud of gas, and something that looked like animated water. But the dragon twins showed no frustration, only the infinite patience that children who had been loved unconditionally always seemed to develop. Nearby, 5-year-old Lily was engaged in what she called friendship translation, with a pair of telepathic twins who couldn't stop accidentally sharing each other's thoughts with everyone in the room. Her solution was characteristically simple. If they were going to share thoughts anyway, they might as well make them interesting ones. She was teaching them to send mental images of funny animals, turning an embarrassing loss of control into an entertaining game. "The progress reports are extraordinary," Dr. Santos said, joining Rose at the observation window. "The shapeshifter child has maintained stable form for 6 consecutive days. The telepathic twins haven't had an uncontrolled mind meld in 3 weeks, and the time-phasing child actually stayed in our dimension for her entire birthday party yesterday," Rose finished with a smile. "I know. I was there when she managed to blow out all her candles before accidentally jumping 30 seconds into the future." The success stories were remarkable, but Rose's attention was drawn to the newest arrival, a small being who appeared to be made of living shadow, sitting alone in the corner and unconsciously absorbing light from everything around them. The child, gender unclear, species unknown, had been found drifting in space, apparently orphaned and completely unable to control their energy absorption abilities. "Shadow is scared," Lily announced, appearing at Rose's elbow with the supernatural ability small children had to know exactly when adults needed their perspective. "They think they're going to hurt someone. What do you think we should do?" Rose asked, falling back on the question that had become her standard response to Lily's observations. "I think," Lily said with the serious tone she used for important decisions, "they need to meet someone who understands being different." Before Rose could ask what she meant, Lily was already walking purposefully across the playroom. Rose watched in fascination as her daughter, and yes, Lily was her daughter now, officially adopted and absolutely beloved, approached the shadow child with the fearless confidence that had always been her greatest strength. But instead of trying to talk to the nervous newcomer, Lily did something unexpected. She sat down cross-legged just outside the shadow's light absorption field and began to glow. It took Rose a moment to understand what she was seeing. Lily was using a technique that Smoke and Ember had accidentally taught her during their early play sessions. She was channeling their firelight through her own human energy field, making herself into a gentle, warm beacon that couldn't be absorbed or extinguished. The shadow child's surprise was evident in the way their absorption field flickered and stabilized. For the first time since arriving, they weren't accidentally draining energy from their surroundings. "You're not scary," Lily said conversationally, maintaining her gentle glow. "You're just hungry for light." Emmy used to be hungry for attention, and Smokey was hungry for friends. Everyone's hungry for something. Smoke and Ember, drawn by the commotion, approached carefully. Rose held her breath as they entered the shadow child's absorption field, and then exhaled in wonder as the dragons adjusted their internal fire to compensate, creating a feedback loop where the shadow child could absorb energy without depleting it. "Incredible," Dr. Santos murmured. "They're creating a sustainable energy ecosystem. The dragons are generating exactly as much light as the shadow child needs to absorb." But Rose was watching something even more remarkable. The moment when 3 children who had learned to love unconditionally decided that everyone deserved to be included in their family. Smoke began creating gentle smoke patterns that danced through the shadow child's absorption field, while Ember used carefully controlled fire to write welcoming messages in light. Lily simply sat and glowed, providing a constant anchor of warmth and acceptance. "Is this what you expected when you started this project?" Dr. Santos asked quietly. Rose shook her head, unable to find words for the emotions filling her chest. 4 years ago, she'd been hired to babysit 2 problem children. Now she was watching those same children teach the galaxy's most challenging young beings that differences weren't obstacles. They were just new ways to connect. From across the playroom came the sound of delighted laughter as the shapeshifter child successfully maintained their preferred form while playing tag with the telepathic twins, who were using their abilities to coordinate their movements in a complex dance. The time-phasing child flickered in and out of visibility, but stayed consistently in the present moment, while the shadow child began to cautiously interact with their new friends, their absorption field stabilizing into something that enhanced rather than drained the group's energy. "Mama Rose," Smoke called out, using the title that never failed to make her heart skip. "Can we show our new friend the garden? I think they might like the light flowers." "Of course," Rose said, though her voice was slightly thick with emotion. "Just remember, no teleporting without permission, no fire without safety checks, and always stay where you can see each other," Ember recited dutifully. "We know, Mama Rose," as the group of children headed toward the Institute's famous garden, where plants from 50 different worlds created a symphony. Of colors and textures, Rose felt a familiar presence behind her. "Proud of your work?" Empress Vala asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Proud of them," Rose corrected, watching as Lily helped the Shadow Child navigate their first experience with the garden's light-responsive flowers. "They're becoming everything I hoped they could be, and things I never even imagined. The Galactic Council has approved expansion to 15 additional facilities," the Empress said. "Your training protocols are being implemented across 7 star systems. The Academy has requested a complete curriculum revision based on your methodologies." Rose nodded, still watching the children. "And how do you feel about your babies becoming the face of galactic education reform?" Empress Vala's laugh carried the warmth that had developed over 4 years of watching an impossible family flourish. "I feel like they were always meant to change the galaxy. They just needed the right human to show them how." "They changed me just as much," Rose said softly, "maybe more." As the artificial sun began to set in the station's carefully controlled day-night cycle, Rose gathered her extraordinary family for their evening routine. 6 children now from 4 different species, each carrying abilities that had once been considered dangerous or unmanageable. But as they settled into their communal bedtime story, tonight, Lily was telling an adventure about brave dragons and clever shadows. Rose saw only what she had always seen: children who deserved love, understanding, and the chance to become themselves. The galaxy was changing, one family at a time, and at the center of that change was the simple, revolutionary idea that had started everything. Love was stronger than fear, understanding was more powerful than control, and every child, no matter how different, how powerful, or how challenging, deserved a chance to find their place in the universe. As Rose turned off the lights and listened to the gentle sounds of 6 children settling into sleep, she smiled at the thought of all the families yet to be helped, all the children yet to be understood, and all the love yet to be shared. The best was yet to come.